Hello, I'm Scott Turner, and I'm Director of Science Programs at the National Association of Scholars. And this is the Week in Science for the 26th of June, 2025. In today's episode, we watch as science works its way through Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief in response to the Trump administration's war on science. Denial still prevails, although some are working their way towards bargaining. We revisit out of Africa. Did a flip in the Earth's magnetic field cause the extinction of the Neanderthals? And we take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly aspects of symbiosis. Okay, let's jump in. If you believe in Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, science may be passing through the first stages of anger and denial. They just can't believe that Trump is doing this to them. Maybe, though, they're starting to enter into the next stage, bargaining, if two editorials in this week's issue of Science magazine are any indication. The first is this lead editorial by Science magazine's editor-in-chief, Holden Thorpe, titled "Sluggishness and Defensiveness Helped Enable an Executive Order on Research Integrity." The executive order Thorpe is talking about was that gold standard science order that was featured 2 weeks ago in episode 7 of The Week in Science. That order, you'll remember, demanded that all agencies that receive federal funding for research conform their research to certain best practices that scientists themselves have been advocating. Because Trump was advocating it, though, those best practices somehow became toxic. I never thought I would say this, but Thorpe makes a point in his editorial that I actually agree with. Namely, that scientists, through toleration and publication of a lot of shoddy science, brought Trump's gold standard science order onto themselves. This is bad, says Thorpe, because the federal government will now have the tools to step in and regulate science, and this will ultimately be destructive to the sciences. Thorpe is in the bargaining stage of grief here. He's hoping that admitting this will somehow make Trump back off and restore all that funding. He still has one foot in the denial stage, though. Political control of science has been the reality for a very long time, ever since the sciences were federalized in 1950, in fact. President Eisenhower warned against this when he left office, but everybody ignored him. All Trump's gold standard science order has done was to say the quiet part out loud again. So, Holden Thorpe is right insofar as science has brought the Trump assault on science on itself. But science, and Holden Thorpe, has forgotten that most elementary of principles. He who pays the piper calls the tune. Then there's this editorial, titled 10 Times Faster is Not 10 Times Better, by Alondra Nelson, who's a professor of social science at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study. Like Holden Thorpe, Nelson stumbles onto a correct point, albeit via a path strewn with denial. She's objecting to a bipartisan initiative in Congress, the American Science Acceleration Project. Note the clever acronym, ASAP. ASAP aligns with the Trump administration's new research priorities in artificial intelligence and advanced computing. The idea, apparently, is to bring the Silicon Valley ethos of, quote, move fast and break things, unquote, into science. According to the two senators sponsoring this initiative, Martin Heinrich, Democrat senator from New Mexico, and Michael Rounds, Republican senator from South Dakota, ASAP aims to make science in the United States 10 times faster by 2030. Now, I'm as big a fan of creative destruction as anyone, but what does 10 times faster science even mean? It reminds me a bit of the Sputnik hysteria in the 1950s. The mentality is certainly the same. America suffers from an artificial intelligence gap, apparently, So, government needs to grab the reins and throw money at science so we can close the gap. Here's where I agree with Alondra Nelson. The only thing that moving fast will break will be science itself. Like in the 1950s, Nelson argues that this new technocratic push will impose conformity on scientists when it's imagination and creativity that will actually carry the day. Prior to 1950, we knew this. After the Sputnik scare, though, shut up and compute became the prevailing ethos. So it likely will be again if ASAP carries the day. Good point, Alondra. But then she descends into diversity speak and equity in computing, and I think we know what that means. Finally comes this story. The 1,800 employees of the National Science Foundation are being kicked out of their rented headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, and they're very unhappy about it. So unhappy, in fact, that they hijacked a news conference to announce the event and filled the hall shouting, "We won't move." Here's how NBC4 in D.C. covered it.
Nearly 2,000 federal government workers learned they're effectively getting kicked out of their office building because a new agency is moving in.
The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development announced HUD is moving its headquarters from a dilapidated building in D.C. into a newer building in Alexandria, Virginia.
But that building is currently home to the National Science Foundation. Several of those employees chanted their opposition today to the news ahead of a news conference. Making a lot of noise there with a lot of people. The News 4 I-team has previously reported on the millions of dollars the federal government is wasting to maintain old, beat-up buildings downtown. But the news that one group of federal employees will be displaced in favor of other workers caught everyone by surprise.
Northern Virginia Bureau reporter Drew Wilder was the only local TV reporter inside today's news conference, and here's what he learned.
Before a rosy news conference touting HUD's relocation to Virginia, a very strange scene played out. The room dedicated to the news conference was half filled with NSF employees, furious that they're being kicked out of their home. Then, abruptly, the news conference was relocated, moved away from the frustrated NSF employees and into a more private space. The HUD media relations folks called it a, quote, logistical issue, which is ironically apropos for the very concerned NSF employees expressed to News 4 off camera. But with those employees out of earshot, Virginia's governor welcomed HUD to the Commonwealth.
I don't think it's been ever that a federal cabinet-level agency has moved its headquarters to Virginia.
A federal employee union claims this move comes with a sweet deal for HUD Secretary Scott Turner. The American Federation of Government Employees issued a statement in which the union says it has not been briefed on the exact details in the plan, but claims it was told that this plan includes a dedicated executive suite for the HUD secretary, the construction of an executive dining room, reserved parking for the secretary's 5 cars, an exclusive elevator for the secretary, a space dedicated to the secretary's executive assistants, and a potential gym for the secretary and his family. Secretary Turner shot down these allegations today.
That's ridiculous. And it's not true. This is not about Scott Turner. It's never been about Scott Turner. I didn't come to government to get nice things. You understand?
HUD's current home is the Weaver Building. The federal government owns it, but says it's falling apart, costing taxpayers millions of dollars in upkeep. In April, the Trump administration put the Weaver Building on the market, part of an ongoing effort to shrink the size of the federal government and potentially decentralize the federal government out of D.C. HUD will be the first agency to leave the district under Trump. But instead of moving the agency into an open, government-owned building, it's moving into the rented NSF building, displacing all of those federal workers. Commissioner Michael Peters says the GSA will support NSF and find the agency a space to continue to fulfill its mission. Is the plan to have NSF a home before HUD moves in here?
We're going to work through, as I said, we're supporting NSF. We want to enable them to continue to fulfill their mission and make this transition as little disruption as possible. We don't have a plan yet.
GSA says the federal government owns several other properties in Alexandria, and they bet that NSF employees will stay in the city. However, right now, they say it's too early to make that a promise. Reporting in Alexandria, Drew Wilder, News 4.
Personally, I would have preferred closing Hood and then demolishing the Weaver building, but that's just me. And if the employees of the NSF think they can mine Trump derangement syndrome so they can stay put, they're probably mistaken. They're being asked to move house, for heaven's sake. In last week's episode, episode 8, I shared with you a paper about human immigration from Africa to the rest of the world. When populations of Homo sapiens began migrating into Eurasia, they encountered previously established populations of other species of Homo, namely the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. We still retain traces of those encounters in our own DNA, by the way. The paper we discussed last week suggested that changing climate in Africa prior to 50,000 years ago equipped modern humans to do better in the more extreme climates they would encounter in Eurasia, which is why they displaced the existing Neanderthal and Denisovan populations. Well, I had some things to say about that. I think it was cultural rather than climatic, but never mind. This week brings a report in The Conversation by two Spanish biologists, José Miguel Tejero and Montserrat Sanz Borras, with the intriguing title asking, "Did a shift in Earth's magnetic poles send Neanderthals to extinction?" Tejero and Borras were commenting on another article in this week's Science Advances titled Wandering of the Auroral Oval 41,000 Years Ago by Agnet Mukhopadhyay and 8 co-authors. Apologies if I mangled the pronunciation there. Mukhopadhyay and his co-authors are astrophysicists who were writing about changes of the Earth's magnetic field over time. Presently, the Earth's magnetic field is aligned pretty well with the north and south geographical poles, that is, the Earth's axis of spin. This alignment is why magnetic compasses can be used as direction finders. The alignment isn't perfect, though. The magnetic poles wander. The North Pole used to be located in northern Canada. Now it's on a trajectory to Siberia. The Earth's magnetic field protects the Earth's atmosphere by deflecting the solar wind. And here's a map of the interaction at present. The Earth is this little half-moon pie at the center. The sun is off to the right, and the solar wind is streaming from right to left. Those lines show how the Earth's magnetic field is deflecting the solar wind. The bow wave is this intense white area to the right of the Earth, where the deflection of the solar wind is most intense. At the magnetic poles, the deflection disappears, and this allows the solar wind to plunge right into the atmosphere and to destructive effect. The aurora borealis, which everyone admires from afar, is actually the atmospheric gases being superheated by the solar wind. From time to time, the Earth's magnetic field does more than just wander around a little. Sometimes it seems to go a little crazy. At times, the magnetic poles flip entirely. The north magnetic pole becomes the south magnetic pole, and vice versa. A compass needle that had pointed north would now point south. And we don't fully understand why this happens. And astrophysicists like Mukhopadhyay and his collaborators want to understand it better. Their paper reconstructs one tumultuous magnetic field event that occurred over a span of about 2,200 years that occurred around 41,000 years ago. It's known as the Reshapes excursion. Here's the magnetic field at maximum disruption. You don't need to know the details of magnetic flux lines to see that things got pretty chaotic there. And here's the magnetic field at the excursion's peak. Main point. Look at how the solar wind is now funneled right into the equatorial and tropical latitudes of the Earth. Presently, it's funneled into the poles, and the aurora would have filled the entire night sky. These events would have disrupted climate at the time, and they also would have stripped away the ozone layer, which shields the Earth from the sun's ultraviolet rays. And people inhabiting the Earth during the Lachamps excursion would have been far more susceptible to sunburn and to skin cancer. Here's where Mukhopadhyay and his co-authors make a remarkable claim. 41,000 years ago was about the same time that the Neanderthals and Denisovans were being displaced by those Homo sapiens populations moving in from Africa. Also, about the same time, the Lachamps excursion was messing up the atmosphere big time. Coincidence? Mukhopadhyay and his co-authors claim that the Lachamps excursion actually facilitated the replacement. So, for example, the Homo sapiens immigrants had developed tailored clothing because they had sewing needles and the skill to make well-fitted garments that could shield their skins. The Neanderthals had not. So, the Neanderthals would have suffered more sunburn and more skin cancer. Homo sapiens were more skilled at constructing shelters or at sheltering in caves. Neanderthals supposedly didn't. Homo sapiens had the custom of coating their skins with ochre, a kind of primitive sunscreen, and the Neanderthals didn't. All of these factors made the Neanderthals more vulnerable to the deleterious effects of the Lachamps excursion than Homo sapiens, which explains why the Neanderthals went extinct and Homo sapiens was able to move in. Right? And here is where Tejeros and Borras come in. They're both Spanish archaeologists, and they throw cold water over Mukhopadhyay et al.'s claims. Neanderthals may not have had sewing needles, but they knew how to clothe themselves with fur and hides. They knew how to tan animal hides into leather, and how to craft leather into draped garments and tents. Neanderthals also were common cave dwellers, and they knew how to construct tents and other shelters from leather. And finally, the Neanderthals knew about ochre because they used it in their decorative arts. And the use of ochre as a skin coating was in fact widespread among other proto-human populations throughout Eurasia. So it seems a bit of a stretch to claim that the Neanderthals were done in during the Lachamps excursion. Mukhopadhyay's group are astrophysicists, not anthropologists, and they did an excellent piece of research on what they know best, namely the dynamics of the Earth's magnetic field. But it's clear that Mukhopadhyay's group got a little ahead of their skis here. So, what's the lesson? Should Mukhopadhyay and his colleagues have just, quote, stayed in their lane, unquote, stuck to what they know best and not venture out of it? Well, that's a common criticism leveled at, say, climate, quote, skeptics, unquote. You can't talk about climate if you're not a climate scientist, whatever that is. Policing science like this only impoverishes it, though. Mukhopadhyay and his colleagues saw an interesting coincidence in that other lane, and they speculated on its meaning. And the speculations were criticized by archaeologists, who knew more about the archaeology than the astrophysicists did. In the end, wandering outside the lines is how exciting science works. And more to the point, it underscores why there is no such thing as settled science. Contrary to what most people might think, Darwinism is not the only scientifically credible model for evolution. There have, in fact, been several scientifically credible alternative models to Darwinism that have been proposed. One of the most famous has been the theory of symbiogenesis, which was developed by the late biologist Lynn Margulis. Margulis proposed that evolution does not proceed by mutation and selection of genes. Rather, it proceeds by different types of organisms coming to live together as one, a phenomenon known as symbiosis. And symbiogenesis is evolution through symbiosis. So, for example, our cells contain tiny organelles called mitochondria, which manage cellular metabolism. In fact, we have to breathe oxygen because our mitochondria demand it. Our origin, and the origin of every other animal on the planet for that matter, can be pinpointed to when mitochondria moved in, so to speak. Green plants, for their part, are green because they contain tiny organelles called chloroplasts, which carry out photosynthesis. And like the mitochondrion, the chloroplast itself began as a photosynthetic bacterium that moved in. And this is the origin of the green plants, which can be traced to when those photosynthetic bacteria took up house. Which leads me to this news article in this week's Nature magazine by Humberto Basilio, titled Wildest Thing: Solar-Powered Slug Steals Chloroplasts and Stores Them for Emergencies. Solar-powered sea slugs? Well, that's an interesting concept. Basilio is referring to another article just published in the journal Cell by Corey Allard and 6 co-authors, titled A Host Organelle Integrates Stolen Chloroplasts for Animal Photosynthesis. The animals Corey et al. Are referring to are sea slugs, which are, as the name implies, shell-less snails that live in the ocean. The sea slugs that Allard et al. Were studying feed on plants, and as they digest their food, they capture the chloroplasts and incorporate them into their digestive tracts in tiny organelles called kleptosomes, which means thieving bodies. Remarkably, the chloroplasts are kept alive within those kleptosomes. The sea slugs are not quite photosynthetic slugs, though. Plants use their chloroplasts to create food, namely sugars from CO2, water, and sunlight. The sea slugs don't seem to be doing this. The nutrients generated by the chloroplasts go to keep the chloroplasts alive. So the sea slugs are practicing a type of organelle husbandry. The chloroplasts keep themselves alive within the guts, where they serve as a kind of emergency food supply. If the sea slug is deprived of food, it will eventually consume those hoarded chloroplasts, enabling the slug to live for about a month longer than they would have otherwise. Symbiogenesis in action. There's also a darker side to symbiogenesis. There's always a darker side. In this case, the dark side is illustrated by a research report in this week's Nature magazine by Gregory Hoover and 15 co-authors titled Nerve to Cancer Transfer of Mitochondria During Cancer Metastasis. Hoover et al.'s article was highlighted in a news article by Tracy Watson, also in this week's Nature magazine, titled Cancer Cells Get Power Boost by Stealing Mitochondria from Nerves. Metastasis is the spread of a group of tumor cells from one tissue into another, and metastasis is what makes cancer deadly. So understanding it is a big part of trying to develop new cancer therapies. It turns out that cancer cells use a type of symbiosis to pull off this trick. They steal mitochondria from nerve cells. Nerve cells are among the most energy-demanding cells in the body, and they're able to do that because they have lots of mitochondria, which the tumor cells steal and share with other tumor cells. And this apparently enables tumor cells not only to power the growth of the tumor and the tumor's colonization of healthy tissues, metastasis. No new therapies yet, but step by small step, new therapies emerge. Okay, that's it for the Week in Science for the 26th of June, 2025. If you have any thoughts, comments, or queries, you can put them into the comments section of this video. We like to have comments, and we like to respond to them. Or, if you like, you can address your comments directly to me at turner@nas.org. And you can always tell your friends and share this video with your own social media networks. July is the centennial of the famous Scopes monkey trial, and I'll be in Dayton, Tennessee covering the event. I might be able to post an episode or two of The Week in Science during July, but this may be the last episode until August. No worries, though. If you subscribe to the National Association of Scholars YouTube page, and you should be a subscriber, you'll get a notification if a new episode comes up, no matter when it does. Just for your interest, I've put links to 4 lead-up articles on the Scopes trial that I published in our online magazine, Minding the Campus. And there's lots more interesting commentary and articles on a variety of topics at the National Association of Scholars website at nas.org. Pay us a visit there. You might even consider joining us as a member. And if you're already a member, thanks again for your ongoing support. Until, well, sometime soon, stay tuned.